Hey guys, Alex here. You might also know me as Radio Runner on Instagram. Welcome to my channel, where I help you guys learn how to become more effective artists. So if you guys have been following along, we are doing a series of plein air workout videos. In these videos, you can paint along with me, work on your skills, and see what I do for time-saving techniques. I'm not a pro by any means, but I am working on learning, and I've been in a couple classes that have taught me some great tips to work on environment painting like this. So let's not waste any more time and hop right in. Okay, so selecting a brush, and we are getting into laying down my gestural sketch. You guys have probably seen the pattern by now. This is how I always start off my studies. It's a lot easier for me to have an understanding of where I want to place things first before just going in directly with paint. Now this is a really complex scene. You can see way out in the distance, we've got a really wide angle lens here. The convergence is set very far apart. And it's a matter of having to understand and control what's going on. I want to exaggerate the road going into the distance here, so I widen that off a bunch. And so that it narrows down to about the same width, but towards the foreground, it takes up that whole canvas. I also try zooming in a little bit. The fisheye lens is not, I don't like it too much, so I'm gonna try and flatten things out a little bit more. I like how there is this boat off in the distance and the mountain shapes plus the building kind of all point to it. And I'm gonna use that as the compositional idea, have everything kind of flow into and point at that boat. The boat's also a little small, and there's so much detail that I was wrestling with the scaling, so I do scale up the boat, make things a little bit larger than they are in reference. So I go in and exaggerate that mountain curve even more. I want things to be large in the foreground and have their angles point towards that boat as drastically as I can possibly make it work. And we'll see. We'll see how it goes. A big recurring theme of these plein air workouts is simplification. There's so much going on, so much to look at, so much to think that you need to put importance on, that working as loosely as possible is going to really help free your mind and change your mindset on how you approach these and what is important. If you can look at an image and think of the compositional idea first, it's going to give you a bit of a target to work towards. If you know that the boat and the angles of this image is what you want to focus on, then make sure that you stress the gesture. Make sure that you have a reason to emphasize that boat. In other plein airs, maybe you want to focus on the clouds of something. So you're going to put less emphasis on what's on the ground and really spend some time making those the showpiece of your image. You can see that I zoomed in quite a bit, but it's not one-to-one with the reference. I'm using what's in the reference to help kind of guide my compositional choices. And it's similar enough, but I'm not beholden to it, is the main point. I'm looking around the image and just finding smaller things that I can add in that, a lot of the times to sell the believability on these sorts of things, you really do need to work in all of the loose, random stuff that just happens to be in the real world. So if you can capture some of that loosely, the more believable your image will come off. especially in urban settings like this. There's just so much going on. One of my favorite artists to watch for urban settings and detailing is Nikolai Lockertson, and he's got plenty of time lapses on YouTube, but he also has a course on using Procreate on Schoolism that I recommend. It's less about plein airs and landscape paintings like this, and more of how he personally uses Procreate. The way I use it now is influenced by him in a large degree, so if you've watched me for any bit of time, it'll be pretty similar. But he manages to get so much detail in such a small amount of time. It's really impressive. In these plein airs, I've been really defaulting to my oil brush that I use in Art of Ian's brush pack. When you use it heavily and lightly, you can get a lot of texture that comes through. It also has color dynamics set up, so every stroke, as well as the individual stamps, have some color variation built in. It means you don't have to work as hard for it to look like you have unique strokes and color choices. It does some of that work for you. I'm just getting these roof shapes in. If you guys are enjoying this, let me know. I've been having a pretty good time with it. I've been thinking that for me personally, because I'm still on that personal development train, I need to get into working on material studies so that I can understand rendering at a higher level to finish off personal pieces and designs to get into the industry with. But these are still good. They're just more like sketches. They're not intended to have a lot of time and attention spent towards them, and it's more of a race against the clock, ruthless application of the fundamentals that you do know. And I've been finding them fun in that regard. I just probably need to work on some stuff that is going to elevate things. And if you guys have any ideas of things you want, I can try to work that into my personal learning schedule, and we can work on learning things together. Should be pretty interesting. So what you saw me doing here with the windows is I made one set, and I did not want to have to paint those again, so I just keep duplicating them, shrinking them, making sure they relatively stay in line with the perspective. And it ends up saving quite a bit of time. We're getting that ground color in. With Procreate's lasso tool, you can have it set to a color fill mode and use your color picker to kind of find the color that you want. It's really handy. I like it quite a bit. So instead of having to rebrush things, you can just start off in the right ballpark that you want to look for. I'm making different color choices overall to this image because the reference looks pretty dry to me. You know, it's dull, kind of lifeless. So I wanted to push that just a little bit. I'm not going to totally rechange the lighting scenario or anything, but I want to have more of a variation of warm and cool, keep things kind of lightish overall. This is a relatively high key reference that we're using, meaning that there aren't a lot of dark values in the picture itself. So I took that idea and I kept that in mind when painting this in. I'm not going to have too much darks. Things are never going to get darker than like 80%. And it helps reinforce the idea of kind of having a bright, sunny, open day. working in that building in the background. So all those organic brushes I picked up in a Ghibli brush pack, and it's been a huge lifesaver for paintings like this. Again, my approach is to generally gesture in a shape with a lasso so that I can control where things start and stop. There's this palm tree, so I use a brush and I'm stroking in individual, leaves of a palm tree, but they have a defined stopping point because of the lasso shape. Alright, what I'm doing there is a bit of what is called the Fresnel effect, and that is established by, he was maybe a physicist or someone named Fresnel, and it's spelt Fresnel, F-R-E-S-N-E-L. Definitely look it up. It is an important thing in art, essentially saying that the farther things away are from your eye, in terms of angle, the more flat they are, the more reflective they are going to be so that all you see is the original light source. Basically saying, when you look directly into water, like you're standing at a creek and you're looking right down at it, you can see right through it. You're not going to get a lot of reflection back. But if you're looking at an ocean and the farther it gets towards the horizon line, the light is reflecting off of that horizon line and coming right back at you. So you're seeing all of the light, primarily, rather than seeing through to the blue color of the water. So you get some of that reflection. It also applies to everything. It applies to people. The more on the edge, whatever light sources there are that are reflecting, you're going to see that more. It definitely applies to metals and glass. Definitely on spheres. The very, very edges always have extra light reflecting away from them. Now I am going in with my lasso tool and drawing in the shadow shape that I want. Since I already had the light color established, I'm just going to go in and use a multiply layer to put in my shadows. I'm finding the kind of tone that I want to look for. I think that I want bluish, but in the image it's relatively desaturated, so I'm kind of keeping it in a more... It's not red overall, it's a purple, but it's not saturated, it's not a deep tone. And now here, I just happen to have some trees cut out because of a project that I was working on, and I'm going to use this as a cheap tool, or cheap trick to get in some shadows. There's this tree shadow shape in the foreground in the reference. I'm just going to stretch that into perspective, and boom. Nice detailed tree shape, I guess. So here is another tip. This is a cloud brush. It's just the shape of a cloud cut out and used as a stamp. I will put it in, and it was a little bit transparent, the image that I have. So I duplicated a couple times to make it more opaque. But you can stretch it around, you can distort it, you can warp it, and it's just a great utilitarian tool, time-saving, to get in the shapes that you want. So what I'm doing here is I want to have that swooping arc that helps point towards the boat. So I'm trying to distort it as much as possible to give that kind of feeling. And then I'm going to switch over to the warp mode in Procreate so that I can push that even more. So I've got that swooping action. And I'm going to use my other cloud and do a similar thing. You can see me it's a compositional piece. I'm finding the shape that I want. Warp is really powerful for that. Man, just having two clouds and you can make different shapes like that. That was another crazy tip shown to me by Kenny Vo. And man, it works. Works really well. These hills to the side have a lot of grain and noise in them, so I was looking for some particle brushes that could just add some texture density. I do want to show my finished work from the brainstorm class that I just did, what WB2 environment design with Kenny Vo. I'll probably get in touch with my classmates and ask if they also feel comfortable sharing their work, and we'll do kind of a class review. We'll talk about it, we'll show what our midterms and our finals were, and the things that we covered and learned. Overall, it was a very beneficial class. Like doing it. Kenny is a dream to work with, and I think that'd make for a good video. I had noticed that the mountains, well, hills on the side are not all green. There's a lot of gray tones. They look pretty rocky. So I'm just correcting for that. Also trying to keep in mind those gestural lines, so I paint along the curve in order to make sure that it maintains that pointing motion towards the boat. What I'm doing here is trying to roughly paint in a rock texture, but this didn't turn out as good as I wanted. The dark shapes were way too thin, so when I do warp it into perspective, it's just kind of underwhelming overall. But you can see me here duplicating it, just getting that detail out relatively quickly, lots of noise and variation. And I try to warp that in to get some of those stones. So what I'm doing here is I need to duplicate it out more so that when I do warp it into perspective, things don't shrink too quickly. You need to have it be longer so that when you do kind of reduce it in perspective, it maintains a more consistent size overall. Here's something that I thought would work. In retrospect, it did not. The Ghibli brush pack has this brush called Architecture Details, and it's just a bunch of squares. I have not yet found a good use case for this, but I thought that it could have been a good way to add some of the stone texture. It didn't work so great. So instead, it said rock texture brush, but it would work with any chalky type brush that you might have. And I used that and just went in, overlaid extra color to get some more distressing on the building overall. So one of the things Kenny talked about in our recent brainstorm class was that as long as you have your focal area or a relative amount of detail density that is really tight, like it's well done, you can get away with other elements being very loose. I'm not going to say that I did that well here. I'm not going to brag about it because these are very quick and there's nothing tight. But in this case, I have a really defined shadow shape in the foreground that helps kind of add some feeling. The clouds are relatively detailed and they point towards the boat, which doesn't need to be detailed. And so since this foreground area off to the side is away from where the focal point is, I don't have to work on detailing that, getting in graphics, getting in light shapes too much on a time limit like this. They can stay looser. That really applies in personal pieces, things that you would be painting for your portfolio or just for personal enjoyment that you spend a long time on. Make sure that your focal points and your foregrounds, the parts that your viewer is going to be looking at, are tight. If those are adequately detailed and really sell the believability of your scene, things in the far background, things on the edges or away from your focal area, do not have to be worked on as much. They can stay looser, it'll save you some time, it'll keep up some of that painterly impressionism that you can lose with this kind of lasso-ish style. But that being said, the lasso also really does help you get finished silhouettes really quickly, which is another thing that adds to the finished feeling. If you had to go in and brush all this and it was just a bunch of splotchy, smudgy messes, it wouldn't look finished for a long time. You'd have to refine all of those edges and get your silhouettes. So I'm just adding some overgrowth. If I had more time, I would have paid more attention to this. But what helps sell believability in urban scenes is just how much stuff there is. And the transitions from ground to walls. It is never just a 90-degree angle. I talked about this and picked it up from modern day James when I was doing group lessons with him. That you can see it in game design all the time. If you think about Dark Souls or Bloodborne, when you have a room, it's how often do you just see the bottom of the wall touching the floor? Almost never. You're going to have barrels in the way, you're going to have dead bodies, you're going to have knapsacks, tools, trinkets, anything to help transition that flat, barren cutoff. And in the real world, this is often done with cracks. There's usually like a different material that is helping ground the stone wall in this image, for instance. Maybe you've got overgrowth. There's all sorts of things. So gravel, leaves being built up, trash. And that's another thing that will really help sell scenes easily You just gotta focus on the right things. So instead of uber detailing a wall, think about what transitions into the wall. Adding that is another element of detail rather than working on render detail, if that makes sense. Getting more objects in the scene as opposed to refining one part. That is a case where working with the lasso isn't as much of a help as if you're trying to get in noise and little tiny minute details. Just use a brush. If you're trying to get all of that stuff that is transitioning walls to ground, just use a brush. If there are details that are far away and a bunch of visual noise, just use a brush. Leave it impressionistic. That doesn't need to be finalized and clear. I often forget that, especially in these plein airs, and I need to work on that more myself. Alright, so what's going on here is a tip that I picked up from Loish herself, and when she does environments, she will flatten out a layer and she will just make lasso choices, lasso shapes, and then use the color balance tool or the brightness sliders to shift, adjust brightness, change the color a little bit. Maybe she'll use an airbrush and add some gradients in. But by doing this, you're just selecting shapes and altering the brightness of it. So then you get some of that ripple in the water without painting anything in. Missed that darker color, and I also made a layer mistake. I put that blue kiosk thing on the same layer, so I couldn't work behind it. Bummer. But yeah, usually more geometry is better than rendering. So in a scene like this, the more you can indicate of, when I say geometry, I mean objects, variation in a building, so it's not just a box. It has this extra thing in front of it. I don't know what it is, but adding that in helps, just sell that there's more to it than just a fake box that we draw onto a canvas. So I selected the background, and that farthest plane into the distance I desaturated and brightened up a little because I want it to match that grayish tone and also make sure that it feels like it's being affected by atmospheric perspective. At this point, I'm considering it relatively finished with all the stuff I want to put in, and it's more about finishing touches, adjusting contrast, watching for the perspective, atmospherically, value control, pushing light and mood, and then just looking for any things that I may have overlooked or missed. For instance, the boat was left completely unpaid attention. I didn't pay attention to it, so I'm just adding some of those shadow shapes. So I always like to do this I'll go into an overlay layer and I will add light bleed and gradient. It's a great way to add extra depth or look like there's just a little bit more going on. So it's a bright sunny day. I want to push that light that feels like it's coming in from the right by having it be warmer on the right side, as well as pushing gradients so there's a little more color variation than there was before. Consider this like using an Instagram filter or color grading in a film. It's just a way to push color and focal area. What I did there is that over the building it was too orange, so it really made this unnatural yellow color. I'm getting rid of the overlay on the building itself, but leaving the adjustments that I had on the ground and the sky. Working in a basic reflection of the boat. It can be overlooked a lot, but it helps add to things. It's just extra stuff. That would also be something that I consider geometry. It's additions of things that make a tangible difference to your piece. I keep feeling like I'm not explaining that concept well enough, but it's really just saying, instead of trying to work on painting an individual rock on a wall, is that adding to your image? What can you add that is going to be something substantial that changes, oh, that wasn't there before, but now that it's gone, you need to have it. That's what I mean by adding new geometry. What I'm doing here is laying in perspective, atmospheric perspective with some fog on a soft brush, and I shrank it down because it was too large overall. Getting rid of it on the clouds, and basically just trying to set those hills back into the distance by reducing their contrast. In Procreate, you can't necessarily do adjustment layers, so I have to duplicate all of them out and flatten the image in order to get them down to a base where I can make final adjustments on. So there you go, see, I flattened it down, and now I can use curves to adjust the contrast of the whole image at once instead of individually. I'll often play with the channels and just see if there's anything that I want to do to try and unify the colors. Overall, I just upped the contrast by deepening the darks. So with this, I'm using a Procreate feature where you can go into pencil mode on an adjustment and affect only certain areas. It's basically masking without having to go through the mask process. I'm using a bloom effect, which essentially just creates a fall off while hyper exposing bright colors by burning them. And I'm just playing around and seeing if I can accentuate the boat a little bit more. But overall, that's about as much as I have to do with this image. Other things that I would do would just be to sharpen it up, add some noise. Occasionally I do chromatic aberration and stuff like that, but you do too much of that at once and it can be overkill. It's all playing at this point. Okay, and that's that. That is plein air workout number 3. I hope you guys are finding this useful. If there's anything that you want to see or any tips that you have in mind that are keeping you up at night, that are providing some difficulty, just leave a comment below and ask a question. I'm always happy to answer. In addition, you can join me on Discord, where I am very active. I talk about these videos and tons of other topics where people are learning with the curriculum that I made. It helped me get to the level that I'm at now after 2 years. With that, I will leave you guys to it. Have fun, and I'll see you on the next one.